Welcome, Travis here. I thought we'd go over a quick tutorial on Vagrant. So I did a blog post here, a few months ago, and sometimes this is just good for my reference to go back through these items. But I think it's helpful to visually see how, in this case, Vagrant can help us in testing environments, in development scenarios, and sort of that DevOps piece of this. So whether you're on the operations side or the development side, we'll just look at tying in the Vagrant piece with VMware Workstation and showing the real power of that, how quickly we can bring up a virtual machine on our local desktop. Again, whether you're a developer and want to sort of iterate on code or utilize this in a server scenario, or whether you're on the ops side and want to test patches, test scripts to really build that base virtual machine with Packer, which we won't cover here, but I think it's helpful to understand and visually see this. Again, if you want to go back to the blog post, I try to detail my notes so I can remember how this process works and go through that, how we can actually quickly build this. The Packer process takes a little bit longer, so here we'll just focus on Vagrant. So really in this scenario, we'll look at steps 3 and 4. So we want to see how can we deploy a VM in a couple minutes once we've built that base image from an ISO using Packer. In this case, it's the steps where we're going to actually bring that virtual machine online from a Vagrant box file. And then we have the flexibility to really suspend, destroy, recreate that virtual machine as needed. So a few things. One of the components that's really needed here is the VMware Workstation provider, the Vagrant provider. So that is a paid offering. For those of you who just want to try this out and aren't going to use Workstation, you can obviously use the free VirtualBox. I just find that the performance of Workstation is a lot better if you're going to be using this to really develop or work on those infrastructure pieces. It provisions a lot more quickly. I didn't have as many issues with that, but obviously you can do that either way. There will be some modifications required if you're going to use that component. But we're really at the point where we've already taken the Packer image. So we took an ISO, downloaded that, either an eval, or if you have a paid ISO, a CD-ROM image, and built that with Packer. So I may cover that in another video, but once that's done, then we have the flexibility to customize and build a Vagrant virtual machine. So the result of that is really a bunch of these files. And I reference a great GitHub repository that has those. Stefan Shearer has a great component here that details a lot of what this does. But once we've got that completed and we use the Packer build, we end up with what we call a Vagrant box file. So this is really all the components, in this case for Workstation, so the VMX files, all the related VMDK files, anything associated with Workstation, packaged with a Vagrant file, and a way for us to quickly bring up that virtual machine and utilize that. So in this case, say I have a scenario where I want to use Windows Server 2016. I've gone through that Packer provisioning process, which takes 40 to 60 minutes to build programmatically from that ISO into a Windows VM. And now we simply can go Vagrant up and build this virtual machine. So what it's going to do is take that box file and clone it and do any of the customizations that we've really detailed, and then bring that VM online. We can connect to it via remote desktop or PowerShell, and then we've got that locally on our machine. And again, the benefit of this really is programmatically building these VMs and with Packer, and then being able to use that with Vagrant afterwards to quickly create these VMs, do testing, maybe iterate on that, tear down, rebuild those VMs quickly. So we'll step away here. I may speed this part up. This only takes a few minutes. We'll note how fast this goes, and then we'll kind of catch up at the end to see what this really provides. I think the visual component of this is just really important for us to understand. So I'll be back shortly. While this process is going on, I thought we'd kind of detail in the notes where we're actually at. So if we've gone to the point where we've actually added the Vagrant box in using this directory, so that's where I point that Vagrant to the particular file, and then we initialize that and add that into the environment. So that's really where we can go from there. We've pulled that box down, and the benefit of this is you don't necessarily have to create that initial build. So in a lot of the notes here, we can actually see where if somebody else has created a Vagrant box that we can pull down, we can download that, initialize it, and Vagrant up and be running. So it's not necessarily that you have to create this from scratch. And in fact, that's the idea, is if you have developers or you have other team members that want to do that, or if you want to just test something from the internet, we can pull down those files and build that virtual machine using Vagrant and using Packer. So we don't necessarily have to use Packer to create the box file. So then once we've done that, once we've initialized it, we can do Vagrant up and then we will have access to this utilizing, again, RDP or PowerShell. So this is one of the newer releases of Vagrant where we could actually use Windows Remote Management to connect via PowerShell instead of having to use an SSH installation, OpenSSH. They used to have to kind of shoehorn that into Windows to be able to connect like we would in a Linux environment. Well, in this case, in newer versions of Vagrant, it's simply using Windows Remote Management so we can connect via RDP or PowerShell. So let's see what that looks like. So now we can quickly go through what happened here. So it cloned the virtual machine, waited for network adapter to come online, and then started the virtual machine. Now again, this is running on my local desktop, and if we look down here, we actually have VMware Workstation running in the background. So Vagrant is able to talk to Workstation without the Workstation being running through the API in that regard, and bringing that virtual machine online, mounting it, powering it on, and whatnot. And then from here, we can it redirects some of the address, so we know what the network address is, and we know what the ports are. And then again, within a few minutes, this is really up online. So now we can do things like Vagrant PowerShell and gain a sort of PowerShell connection from my local machine to that Windows VM. If we're thinking more of a sort of in a command line sense, this is an easy way for us to do this. So now we've got that, we can say, so that's the host name of that virtual machine that's running. We can do something like test net connection. There's a PowerShell commandlet that will run and test to sort of a Microsoft beacon somewhere on the internet, do a ping test, do some basic network testing to say, yes, we're up and running there. So I'm going to exit, so I'm disconnecting from that PowerShell session, and we can also do Vagrant RDP in this scenario too. And this will allow us to bring up a remote desktop connection, connect to it that way. Again, in a Windows world, we're kind of migrating from, we're usually used to connecting via a GUI, but as this kind of evolves, as things like containers on Windows and other components come about, so the default password is just Vagrant and Vagrant depending on what you've set that to be. I'll set it to remember me, and we will connect. We may use more and more command line, but obviously a lot of the remote administration is done that way. Let me close this launchy piece. So now we're connected to that Windows 2016 virtual machine running on our local system, and we can do whatever we need to. Some other things of note is I've done some customization. So as part of that Packer build, we can do things like if we may have other applications installed like Chocolatey or whatever to do package management. We may do base installations of other applications. So if I want to verify that PowerShell in the Windows Management Framework is installed here, we can run this through the PowerShell commandlet and see, that we've got some other components really installed there. So again, Vagrant, and that's an easy way for us to bring this online, connect. We can do certain things to that machine. Now, similarly, we can actually destroy this. So if I am done with whatever development or ops process that I'm running through, maybe I've tested patches, maybe I've tested deployment script. Well, first let's look at Vagrant status so we can see really what we've got running. Because remember, this isn't just going to be a single virtual machine scenario. We may run multiple virtual machines to simulate a development environment. But the idea is it's really programmatic, and we can see what virtual machines we have running in Vagrant via that API. We're programmatically doing this in Workstation because there's no reason we couldn't necessarily build a virtual machine in Workstation manually, bring that online and manage it. Vagrant and Packer just allow us to do that in a different way and do that in a way that's more prescriptive rather than manually using the GUI and those other items to do that. So we can see that virtual machine is running. We can do things like suspend. We can do some snapshot capabilities if we want to. But here in this case, say I'm done with that, we can also I can do Vagrant and destroy and F for force. And within, a few seconds, we can actually destroy that virtual machine and it's gone. And if we want to bring up another one, we can do the same thing, work through that same process that we did in the past. So hopefully this is helpful for you. Again, I think it's just helpful to understand how this works a little bit and be able to be aware of how this can help you in either development or operations, where it's one of those first tools that we can use to really simplify that deployment process, simplify testing, not have to rely on manually creating virtual machines or snapshots from VMs. We can do this in a programmatic fashion, and we can really share that with others. So I hope this video was helpful. Please subscribe and reach out to me with questions. Thanks for joining me.